Back in July 2021, developers Neon Giant threw out a cyberpunk adventure running on Unreal Engine 4 that kicked your eyes in the teeth with what is, I feel, one of the most stunning usages of Epic's powerhouse engine in years, with the Ascent. Originally released on PC and Xbox consoles, the One and Series models, the Ascent was a magnificent visual tour de force of a horizontal dystopian visual design with neon lights and particle-laden explosions. The superb visual design and art direction, very clearly inspired by Ridley Scott's classic Blade Runner, made the Ascent stand out starkly from the crowd, with an impressive sense of scale that helped make you feel just like another cog in the machine. The use of specular highlights on all the metallic surfaces, coupled with the stunning use of Unreal Engine lighting, especially with all those wonderful neon signs and lights, was nothing short of inspiring. This beauty, however, came at a price. At least it did on the Xbox One hardware. Impressively long load times, constant frame dips, judder and hitches were all par for the course, and this was on an Xbox One X when I first experienced it. As near as I can tell, the game was running at about its highest settings. Neon Giant have patched the game since then, but the performance issues and long load times still persist, albeit to a lesser degree than before. This fact is what makes the game's PlayStation debut for the PS4 generation of machines and the PS5 nothing short of revelatory. Before we get into the details though, the Ascent is an isometric twin-stick action RPG shooter, set in a future where corporations run everything, including entire habitats and possibly planets. Work has become slavery in everything but name. All those shows you've watched and those books you've read that show how bad the future is going to be, well, that's the Ascent setup in a nutshell. The corporations own everything, including you. As a new indent to the Ascent Corporation, you're basically the muscle for anything that your less than benevolent overseers want done. When the Ascent Corporation goes belly up, it becomes a mad free-for-all as everyone tries to grab what they can and pop themselves into position of power and claim what's left of the Ascent's assets. You start off here at the tail end of this power grab. Your contract is transferred, and you have no choice but to do as you're told, which includes a whole lot of shooting, gibbing, explosions, and oodles upon oodles of collateral damage. Gameplay-wise, the Ascent doesn't do all that much different from other isometric shooters, but it does give you depth to the gameplay in the form of a character creator and its light RPG systems, which include stat points to distribute on leveling up, augments to unlock and use, and, most importantly, plenty of side quests to tackle. Another element is crafting and enhancing your weapons, which, believe me, you're going to want to do, because the Ascent is quite challenging, especially if played solo. In combat, you can dodge roll, take cover, and shoot over obstacles without having to blind fire, but the game throws a lot of enemies at you, including boss fights that can be extremely challenging without some sort of plan. To improve your chances, you can make use of augments, and these range from simply increasing your health to being able to summon droids to help you in fights, all of which are governed by both the cooldown and the amount of energy reserves you have. Grenades too are on a cooldown, so you can't just spam these area of effect attacks endlessly. As traditional as the combat may be, it's incredibly solid and well put together, and, dare I say it, quite addictive. I was sucked more into the game and the world this time than I was when it originally launched, and I think a fair amount of that original disconnect had to do with the performance problems at launch. Which brings us to this version's performance and the visual section of this review. The Ascent is still a jaw-dropping technical showcase. Environments are gorgeously put together, and the world is chock full of NPCs. The attention to detail, right down to the garbage littering the streets, is phenomenal. The environment is full of destructible items, from futuristic hover cars to cement planters and pillars, which makes the level of detail, from the sharp designs on the overhead skywalks to the transparent glass surfaces that you see 3 to 4 floors below you, thoroughly absurd. Honestly, it's hardly a wonder that the original release was plagued by performance issues, when there's so much being rendered on the screen at once. Within my first 3 hours alone, I took 46 screenshots, and would gladly take more. But the real question is, how does it run on Sony's 2 machines, both the PS5 and the much more limited PS4? First off, let's hit up the PS5 version of the game, as it's really the easier one to talk about. Performance is, simply put, stellar. Visually, the game is running on what I assume are all the higher settings, with nary a hitch in sight. That's right, you're getting the Ascent, with all its visual glory, with all that VFX as they're supposed to be, and Sony's Beast handles it with aplomb. Whether it's a boss, or it's minions in a massive firefight in a crowded street, and boy, those streets are crowded, the PS5 didn't even need so much as a breather. And those load times? As you'd expect, they're quite short, not nearly instantaneous, but I didn't have time to check messages and reply to some while waiting for the game to load up. On the numerous occasions when I died and needed to reload, the load times are not even worth mentioning, they were so fast. Sadly, there's no ray tracing support in the game, and the only options you'll find under the graphics tab are motion blur and film grain. At this point you might be wondering, what about the base PS4? Surely, if an Xbox One X struggled, then Sony's base machine should too. Well, first up, the PS4 version is running at a decidedly lower resolution than its higher-end brother. Additionally, it's also running lower resolution assets and features a much lower crowd density. The image quality is a little on the fuzzy side, with the bloom lighting faring the same, making for a much softer looking image in comparison to the PS5. That said, it's not a deal breaker, since the overall visual design of the game, all its futuristic aesthetics, still remain firmly in place. As with the PS5 version of the game, the only graphics options you'll find are for film grain and motion blur. On the upside, when it comes to performance, the PS4 handles the Ascent quite well. Load times are also vastly improved over the Xbox versions, with the game jumping into the menu screen quite quickly, and loading into the game in a little over a minute. Dying and continuing is also much faster than the initial load, albeit not as fast as the PS5. In that regard, it's a big improvement over the base Xbox One version, in which load times could take up to 5 to 6 minutes from the moment you try to start the game, just to get into the menu, and then you'd still have to load into the world. Now, there are still frame drops on the PS4 version, mostly during large-scale firefights, but again, they're less frequent than what I experienced on the base Xbox One, or even the Xbox One X at launch. There also weren't any hitches and stutters that I encountered during my initial playthrough of the game. Overall, I was hard-pressed to find fault with the game's performance on the base PS4, as it felt more than smooth enough across the board. So right now, if you're a PlayStation owner, the question isn't so much which machine should you play the Ascent on, as much as it is, should you play the Ascent? And the answer is a definite yes. Whether you're a PS4 or PS5 owner, this game is more than worth your time. The Ascent's cyberpunk setting and visuals might be what drew me to it, but it was the fun, addictive gameplay that kept me tracking down every side quest I could, or pumping round after round into the game's many enemies. This is a dystopian sci-fi journey I highly recommend you take.